In the autumn of 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt stood on a barren hillside in southeastern Turkey, holding a handful of stone fragments that would soon shake the foundations of everything historians thought they knew about human civilization. The hill, known locally as Göbekli Tepe, which translates to Potbelly Hill, had been surveyed decades earlier and dismissed as nothing more than a medieval cemetery. But Schmidt saw something different in the scattered flint tools and limestone chips covering the ground. He suspected that beneath this unremarkable mound lay something far older and far more significant than anyone had imagined. Schmidt had spent years working at nearby Nevalachori, another ancient site in Turkey where he had seen similar T-shaped pillars. When he examined the surface of Göbekli Tepe more closely, he noticed the telltale signs of worked stone and deliberate human construction. Despite skepticism from colleagues who doubted that anything of importance could be hidden under what looked like a simple hill, Schmidt convinced the German Archaeological Institute to fund a small excavation. What he uncovered in those first few months would force the entire archaeological community to reconsider the story of human development. The initial trenches revealed massive limestone pillars, some standing over 5 meters tall and weighing up to 10 tons. These weren't crude stones stacked haphazardly. They were carefully shaped into T-forms, arranged in circular patterns and covered with intricate carvings of animals. Foxes, snakes, wild boars, vultures, scorpions and lions leaped across the surface of the stone in remarkable detail. Some pillars featured human-like arms carved along their sides, suggesting they might represent stylized human figures. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, especially considering the age of the site. As Schmidt and his team began carbon dating organic materials found in the mortar and fill, the results came back with dates that seemed impossible: 9,600 BCE, possibly even earlier. To put this in perspective, Göbekli Tepe was built more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge and roughly 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. It predates pottery, the invention of writing, the wheel, and even the development of agriculture. According to the traditional understanding of human history, the people who built Göbekli Tepe should have been small bands of hunter-gatherers living hand-to-mouth, moving from place to place in search of food. They should not have had the social organization, the manpower, or the motivation to construct something as massive and complex as this stone temple. Yet here it was, undeniable evidence carved into limestone and buried under centuries of earth. The site consists of multiple circular structures, each ringed by these enormous T-shaped pillars. The largest pillars stand at the center of each circle, surrounded by smaller stones arranged like seats in an amphitheater. Archaeologists have identified at least 20 of these circular enclosures through ground-penetrating radar, though only a fraction have been fully excavated. Each enclosure appears to have been carefully filled in and buried before a new one was built nearby, layer upon layer, creating an artificial hill that rose higher with each generation. The effort required to build even one of these structures would have been immense. Quarrying the limestone, transporting the massive pillars, carving the detailed reliefs, and erecting them in precise circular formations would have required hundreds of people working together over extended periods. This raises the central mystery of Göbekli Tepe. How did hunter-gatherers accomplish this? The standard narrative of human history places the rise of complex societies after the agricultural revolution. The idea is that once people learned to farm and domesticate animals, they could settle in one place, produce surplus food, and develop the specialized labor and social hierarchies necessary for monumental construction. But Göbekli Tepe turns this story upside down. The people who built it had no domesticated plants or animals. They hunted gazelles, wild cattle, and other game. They gathered wild grains and nuts. They lived in temporary camps, not permanent villages. And yet, they came together to build a structure that rivals anything produced by later agricultural civilizations. Schmidt spent the rest of his life excavating and studying Göbekli Tepe, working at the site every summer until his death in 2014. He believed that the site was a regional sanctuary, a place where different hunter-gatherer groups came together for religious ceremonies and communal feasts. The animal carvings, he argued, might represent totems or clan symbols, with each pillar dedicated to a particular group. The circular structures could have been gathering places for rituals, perhaps connected to ancestor worship or shamanic practices. Evidence of large-scale feasting has been found at the site, including thousands of animal bones, many showing signs of butchering and cooking. It's possible that people traveled from across the region to participate in ceremonies at Göbekli Tepe, bringing offerings of game and gathering for celebrations that reinforced social bonds. But the implications go even deeper. Some researchers now propose that the need to support these gatherings may have actually driven the development of agriculture. If hundreds or thousands of people were periodically gathering at Göbekli Tepe, feeding them would have required an enormous amount of food. Wild grain grows abundantly in the region, and early visitors to the site may have harvested it to feed the crowds. Over time, people may have begun cultivating these grains intentionally, selecting for larger seeds and more productive plants. In this view, religion and ritual came first, and agriculture developed as a consequence of the need to sustain sacred gatherings. This reverses the traditional cause and effect relationship that has defined our understanding of the Neolithic revolution for generations. The symbolism of the carvings adds another layer of mystery. While many of the animals depicted, lions, foxes, boars, are recognizable and were common in the region during the Neolithic period, their arrangement and frequent pairing suggest they held symbolic meaning. Vultures appear repeatedly, sometimes shown with human heads in their talons, possibly indicating practices related to sky burial or beliefs about the afterlife. Snakes are carved in abundance, often intertwined with other creatures. Some researchers see astronomical significance in the placement and orientation of the pillars, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe may have functioned as an ancient observatory, with certain structures aligned to celestial events. Others point to the prevalence of predator animals and argue that the site represents a cosmology centered on danger, hunting, and the wild forces of nature. One of the most puzzling aspects of Göbekli Tepe is that it was deliberately buried. Around 8000 BCE, after perhaps 1500 years of use, the people who maintained the site carefully filled in the circular structures with earth and rubble, preserving them perfectly but rendering them invisible. New enclosures were built on top, only to be buried in turn. Eventually, the entire complex was covered, creating the hill that stood undisturbed until Schmidt's excavation. Why would a community invest so much effort in building these structures only to bury them? Some archaeologists suggest that burial was part of a ritual process, a way of closing one sacred chapter and beginning another. Others propose that environmental or social changes made the site obsolete, and burial was a way of honoring its memory. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe has forced archaeologists to reconsider sites that were previously dismissed or misunderstood. Similar T-shaped pillars and circular enclosures have since been found at other locations in southeastern Turkey and northern Syria, suggesting that Göbekli Tepe was not an isolated phenomenon but part of a broader cultural tradition. These sites collectively point to a sophisticated and widespread society of hunter-gatherers who possessed symbolic thinking, artistic skill, and organizational capacity far beyond what was previously believed possible for people of that era. Yet many questions remain unanswered. Who exactly were the people who built Göbekli Tepe? Where did they come from, and what happened to them after the site was abandoned? What did the rituals performed there look like? And what beliefs drove people to invest so much labor in creating these monuments? Why are there no signs of permanent habitation at the site, no houses or storage facilities, only the ceremonial structures themselves. And perhaps most intriguingly, what other undiscovered sites lie buried beneath the hills and plains of the ancient Near East, waiting to reveal even more about the capabilities and complexity of our prehistoric ancestors? Göbekli Tepe stands as a humbling reminder that human history is far deeper, stranger, and more complex than we often acknowledge. It challenges the neat linear progression from simple to complex, from primitive to civilized. It shows that the people who lived 12,000 years ago were not crude savages struggling to survive, but thoughtful, creative, and deeply spiritual beings capable of remarkable achievements. The temple on Potbelly Hill, with its towering pillars and enigmatic carvings, continues to guard its secrets, even as each excavation season brings new discoveries. For now, it remains one of the most important and least understood monuments in the world, a place where the story of civilization began, not with grain and livestock, but with stone, symbol, and the enduring human need to create meaning in the world. For thousands of years, Hindu families across India have told their children stories of Dwarka, the golden city built by Lord Krishna on the western coast of the subcontinent. According to the Mahabharata and other ancient texts, Dwarka was a marvel of engineering and beauty, a coastal capital with grand palaces, wide streets, and bustling ports where ships arrived from distant lands. The texts describe the city as having been constructed on reclaimed land, protected by massive walls and filled with prosperity. But when Krishna departed from the earthly realm, the ocean rose and swallowed the city whole, taking its splendor beneath the waves. For generations, scholars and historians dismissed these accounts as religious mythology, beautiful stories with no basis in historical fact. Then, in the late 1980s, the marine archaeologists began finding stone structures lying on the seabed off the coast of modern-day Dwarka in Gujarat, and the line between myth and reality started to blur. The search for the submerged city began not with archaeologists, but with local fishermen and divers who had long reported snagging their nets on underwater stone formations. These stories were treated as curiosities until Dr. S.R. Rao, a respected archaeologist who had previously worked on excavations at other Indus Valley sites, decided to investigate. In 1983, Rao led a preliminary survey of the waters off the coast of Dwarka, using side-scan sonar and diving teams. What they discovered was startling. Geometric stone structures, including what appeared to be walls, bastion-like formations, and pathways, all submerged beneath 20 to 40 meters of seawater. The structures stretched across a significant area of the seafloor, suggesting the remains of a substantial settlement. Dr. Rao's initial findings sparked interest from the National Institute of Oceanography in Goa, which launched more systematic underwater expeditions throughout the late 1980s and 1990s. These missions were led by marine archaeologists, including Dr. S.R. Rao himself, and later continued by researchers like Dr. Alok Tripathi. Diving in the murky, sediment-filled waters off Gujarat's coast is no simple task. Visibility often drops to less than a meter, and strong currents make it difficult for divers to work methodically. Despite these challenges, the teams brought up hundreds of artifacts, stone anchors with holes drilled through them, pottery shards, beads, and sections of what appeared to be dressed stone blocks arranged in linear patterns. The most controversial findings came when samples of wood and other organic materials embedded in the underwater structures were sent for carbon dating. Several samples returned dates ranging from 7,500 BCE to as recent as 1500 BCE, with some suggesting human activity in the area as far back as 9,000 years ago. If accurate, these dates would place the oldest structures in a time period when, according to conventional archaeological understanding, the Indian subcontinent had not yet developed large urban centers. The Indus Valley Civilization, with its famous cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, is generally dated to around 3,300 to 1300 BCE. The idea that a substantial settlement could have existed thousands of years earlier challenges the established timeline of South Asian history. The underwater structures themselves have been the subject of intense debate. Supporters of the archaeological interpretation point to features that appear too regular to be natural. Long straight walls running parallel to each other, corner joints where stones meet at right angles, and the presence of stone anchors that clearly indicate maritime activity. Some sections of the site show stone blocks that appear to have been cut and placed deliberately, though erosion and marine growth make it difficult to assess their original form. Aerial surveys and sonar mapping have revealed patterns that proponents argue resemble urban planning, with what might be streets, building foundations, and defensive walls. Skeptics, however, urge caution. Underwater geologist Dr. Gore and others have noted that natural geological processes can create formations that look deceptively man-made. Tidal action, erosion, and the fracturing of sedimentary rock along natural fault lines can produce straight edges and geometric shapes. Without more definitive evidence, such as clear construction techniques, mortar, tool marks, or a greater concentration of artifacts directly associated with the stones, it is difficult to conclusively prove that the formations are ruins rather than natural rock outcrops. The debate remains unresolved, with passionate arguments on both sides. What makes the Dwarka discovery particularly compelling is the convergence of multiple lines of evidence. The Mahabharata describes Dwarka as a coastal city that was eventually submerged by the sea. Geological studies confirm that sea levels in the region have risen significantly since the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. At that time, the coastline would have extended much farther out into what is now the Arabian Sea, exposing land that is today underwater. Coastal settlements built during this period would have been gradually inundated as glaciers melted and ocean levels rose. This process, known as marine transgression, has been documented around the world and is known to have submerged vast areas of habitable land. If a city or large settlement did exist off the coast of Dwarka, during the early Holocene period, it would have been positioned on what was then dry land or shallow coastal terrain. As sea levels rose over millennia, the inhabitants would have faced repeated flooding, forcing them to either abandon their homes or relocate further inland. The final inundation might have been sudden, caused by a particularly severe storm surge or earthquake-triggered tsunami, creating the dramatic cultural memory preserved in the ancient texts. Stories of catastrophic floods are common in the mythologies of many cultures, and some researchers believe these tales may preserve real memories of climatic and geological events that reshaped coastlines thousands of years ago. The cultural and religious significance of validating the Dwarka story cannot be overstated. For millions of Hindus, the Mahabharata is not merely a collection of myths, but a chronicle of real events, people, and places. The idea that archaeological evidence might confirm the existence of Krishna's city has generated enormous public interest and emotional investment. Pilgrimages to modern Dwarka, a town on the Gujarat coast, are already common, with devotees visiting the Dwarkadish temple, believed to stand near the site of the original city. The discovery of underwater structures has only deepened this connection, with many viewing the findings as proof that the sacred texts contain historical truth. This intersection of faith and science creates a complex dynamic. Archaeologists must balance rigorous scientific standards with respect for cultural beliefs, while also contending with the inevitable politicization of their work. In India, where questions of historical identity and religious heritage are often contentious, the Dwarka excavations have become a flashpoint. Some nationalist groups have seized upon the findings as validation of ancient Indian civilization's antiquity and sophistication, sometimes exaggerating or misrepresenting the evidence. Meanwhile, secular scholars warn against allowing religious or political agendas to distort the scientific process. The truth, as always, must be pursued carefully, with an open mind and adherence to methodological rigor. Further complicating the picture is the broader context of submerged landscapes around the Indian coastline. In recent years, similar underwater structures and artifacts have been reported off the coasts of Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and other regions. Some researchers believe that an entire network of ancient coastal settlements may lie beneath the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, representing a lost chapter of South Asian prehistory. If sea levels rose by more than 100 meters since the last glacial maximum, then a significant portion of the subcontinent's early human activity would have occurred on land that is now underwater. The implications are staggering. Entire civilizations, trade routes and cultural centers could have been erased from the visible archaeological record, preserved only in myth and scattered underwater remains. One of the most intriguing artifacts recovered from the waters near Dwarka is a collection of stone anchors, some weighing several hundred kilograms with holes bored through them for ropes. These anchors are found in significant numbers and are consistent with designs used by ancient mariners across the Indian Ocean. Their presence indicates that the area was once a major port or anchorage, supporting the textual descriptions of Dwarka as a thriving maritime hub. Pottery fragments recovered from the site include both local wares and styles that suggest long-distance trade, possibly with the Indus Valley or even Mesopotamia. This evidence of seafaring and commerce strengthens the case for a substantial human presence in the region during ancient times. The dating controversy, however, persists. While some carbon dates push the site's origins back to 9,000 years ago, other samples yield much more recent dates, clustering around the late Bronze Age or early Iron Age, roughly contemporary with the later phases of the Indus Valley civilization. This range of dates could indicate multiple phases of occupation, some with the site being used and reused over thousands of years. Alternatively, some of the older dates may come from driftwood or other materials that were not originally part of the structures, leading to misleading conclusions. Resolving these discrepancies will require more extensive excavation, better stratigraphic control, and additional dating techniques, such as thermoluminescence or optically stimulated luminescence applied to pottery and stone. Despite the challenges and uncertainties, the work continues. Each diving season brings new artifacts to the surface, and advances in underwater survey technology, including remotely operated vehicles and high-resolution sonar, are providing clearer images of the seabed structures. International collaboration with marine archaeologists from around the world has brought fresh perspectives and methodologies to the project. The Indian government has recognized the site's importance, designating parts of the underwater area as protected heritage zones to prevent looting and unauthorized salvage. For now, Dwarka remains a place where legend and archaeology intersect, where ancient stories whispered across generations meet the hard evidence of stone and carbon. Whether the underwater structures are the remains of Krishna's golden city or simply the remnants of a forgotten coastal settlement, they testify to the reality that the ocean has swallowed much of our past. The submerged stones off the coast of Gujarat are a reminder that history is not only written in the ground we walk on, but also lies hidden beneath the waves, waiting for patient hands and curious minds to bring it back into the light. The search for the lost city of Dwarka is, in many ways, a search for connection between past and present, between faith and evidence, between the stories we tell and the truths we uncover. In the spring of 2005, Semir Osmanagic, a Bosnian-American businessman and amateur archaeologist, stood on a hillside overlooking the town of Visoko in central Bosnia and Herzegovina and saw something that no one else had noticed. The hill, known locally as Visočica, rose sharply from the valley floor in a shape that struck Osmanagić as too geometric to be natural. Its faces appeared triangular, its slopes remarkably uniform, and its orientation seemed aligned with the cardinal directions. Having spent years studying ancient pyramids in Central and South America, Osmanagić believed he was looking at something extraordinary. A massive man-made pyramid, older and larger than any known structure in Europe, hidden beneath centuries of soil and vegetation. Within months, he would announce his discovery to the world, recalling it the Pyramid of the Sun and claiming it was part of a complex of pyramids that could rewrite European prehistory. The announcement ignited one of the most contentious archaeological debates of the 21st century. Osmanagić's background is unconventional for someone making such bold archaeological claims. He earned degrees in political science and economics, worked in the metal industry, and spent years living in Houston, Texas, where he developed a passion for ancient civilizations. He authored several books on the pyramids of Central America and the possible influence of advanced ancient cultures. His theories often leaned toward the alternative history perspective, suggesting that lost civilizations possessed knowledge and technology that mainstream archaeology had overlooked. When he returned to Bosnia and saw the hills around Visoko, he applied the same interpretive lens, seeing evidence of deliberate construction rather than natural erosion. The town of Visoko itself has a rich history. It served as the seat of the medieval Bosnian kingdom in the 14th and 15th centuries, and the hilltop was known to have hosted a fortress and royal residences during that period. Archaeologists had previously conducted limited excavations on Visočica Hill, uncovering medieval walls and artifacts, but no one had seriously considered the possibility that the hill itself might be artificial. Osmanagić's proposal was radical. He argued that the entire hill was a pyramid, constructed perhaps 12,000 years ago or more, predating the Egyptian pyramids by thousands of years. If true, it would make the Bosnian pyramids the oldest and largest in the world. Osmanagić established the Archaeological Park, Bosnian Pyramid of the Sun Foundation, and began fundraising for excavations. He attracted volunteers from around the world, including alternative history enthusiasts, spiritual seekers, and curious tourists. Work began in earnest in 2006, with crews digging trenches into the hillsides and clearing vegetation to expose the underlying stone. What they uncovered fueled both excitement and controversy. Large blocks of what appeared to be conglomerate stone were revealed, some with flat surfaces and angular edges. In certain areas, the blocks seemed to be stacked in regular layers, separated by what Osmanagić and his supporters described as a primitive cement or mortar. Wood terraces cut into the hillside appeared too uniform to be natural erosion features, and alignments with the cardinal directions seemed too precise to be coincidental. The Pyramid of the Sun, as Osmanagić named it, stands approximately 220 meters tall, which would indeed make it taller than the Great Pyramid of Giza if the entire hill were proven to be a constructed monument. Nearby, Osmanagić identified other hills that he claimed were additional pyramids: the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Dragon, the Pyramid of Love, and the Temple of Mother Earth. Together, these formations would constitute a sprawling pyramid complex covering several square kilometers. Ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging surveys conducted by Osmanagić's team reportedly showed anomalies beneath the surface, including what they interpreted as internal chambers, passageways, and voids that could indicate artificial construction. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Bosnian pyramid claims involves an extensive tunnel network known as Ravne, located a few kilometers from Visočica Hill. These tunnels, which run for several kilometers underground, were partially known before Osmanagić's work, but had not been thoroughly explored. Osmanagić's teams cleared sections of the tunnels, revealing passages carved through conglomerate rock and clay. Inside, they found large stone blocks, some inscribed with markings that supporters claimed were ancient symbols. The tunnels, according to Osmanagic, connected the pyramids and served ceremonial or functional purposes. He also promoted the idea that the site emitted unusual energy phenomena, including electromagnetic fields and ultrasonic frequencies, which he suggested had healing properties. Thousands of visitors have since traveled to the tunnels, seeking spiritual experiences and wellness benefits. The reaction from the mainstream archaeological community was swift and overwhelmingly negative. In 2006, a group of European archaeologists issued a public statement condemning the excavations, calling them a cruel hoax and a pseudo-archaeological project that was damaging legitimate medieval remains on Vysočina Hill. They argued that the so-called pyramids were simply natural hills known as flatirons, geological formations created by the uplift and erosion of sedimentary rock layers. The regular appearance of the slopes, they explained, resulted from the differential weathering of rock strata, a well-understood geological process. The stone blocks that Osmanagic claimed were man-made construction materials were, in the view of geologists, naturally occurring conglomerate, a type of sedimentary rock composed of rounded pebbles cemented together by mineral deposits. The supposed mortar between blocks was simply layers of clay or fine sediment deposited between rock strata over millions of years. Dr. Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University, known for his work on dating the Sphinx, visited the site and concluded that the formations were natural. He noted that the conglomerate stones showed no evidence of tooling, shaping, or deliberate placement. The alignment with cardinal directions, skeptics argued, was coincidental and could be found in many natural landforms. The critics also pointed out that no artifacts clearly associated with pyramid construction, such as tools, quarry sites, or construction debris, had been found in contexts that would support the pyramid hypothesis. The medieval artifacts recovered from the site were consistent with known historical occupation but provided no evidence of ancient monumental architecture. Yet Osmanagic and his supporters pushed back, accusing the academic establishment of closed-mindedness and institutional bias. They argued that mainstream archaeologists dismiss the site without conducting thorough investigations, relying instead on preconceived notions about European prehistory. Supporters highlighted the geometric precision of certain features, the presence of what they insisted was worked stone, and the cultural memory in Bosnian folklore of ancient structures and sacred sites in the Visoko area. They pointed to the fact that official excavations had been limited and that geophysical surveys suggested subsurface anomalies deserving further study. Some alternative researchers suggested that the site could be linked to a lost Ice Age civilization, possibly predating the Younger Dryas period around 12,000 years ago, a time of dramatic climatic upheaval that some believe may have wiped out advanced prehistoric cultures. The political and cultural dimensions of the Bosnian pyramid controversy cannot be ignored. Bosnia and Herzegovina, still recovering from the devastating wars of the 1990s, has struggled with economic hardship and a search for national identity. The pyramid claims offered a source of pride and international attention, attracting tourists and generating income for the region. The local government in Visoko has supported the project, viewing it as an economic opportunity and a way to put Bosnia on the map. For some Bosnians, the pyramids represent a reclaiming of cultural heritage and a challenge to Western-dominated narratives of history. This has created a complex dynamic where scientific debate becomes entangled with nationalism, tourism, and post-conflict identity politics. International media coverage of the Bosnian pyramids has been mixed. Some documentaries and articles have presented Osmanagic's claims uncritically, emphasizing the mystery and the possibility of rewriting history. Others have focused on the scientific objections, framing the story as a case study in pseudo-archaeology and the public's appetite for sensational discoveries. The site has become a pilgrimage destination for those interested in alternative history, ancient mysteries, and New Age spirituality. Festivals, conferences, and guided tours are regularly held at the site, with attendees often expressing a sense of wonder and connection to something ancient and mysterious, regardless of the scientific debate. One of the persistent questions is why mainstream archaeology has been so quick to dismiss the site. Osman Agic and his supporters argue that academic institutions are resistant to evidence that challenges established timelines and paradigms. They suggest that careers, funding, and reputations are built on certain assumptions about the past, and that discoveries which threaten those assumptions are marginalized or ridiculed. There is historical precedent for major archaeological sites being initially dismissed. Troy, for example, was considered mythical until Heinrich Schliemann's excavations in the 19th century proved its existence. Critics of Osman Agic counter that skepticism is a fundamental part of the scientific method and that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The burden of proof, they argue, lies with those making the claims, and so far, the evidence presented has not met the rigorous standards required to overturn geological and archaeological consensus. Scientific testing has yielded mixed and often disputed results. Radiocarbon dating of organic material found at the site has produced a wide range of dates, some quite ancient. But these dates do not necessarily indicate when the stone formations were created. They could simply reflect the age of organic matter that naturally accumulated over time. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have shown subsurface features, but interpreting these readings is complex, and anomalies do not automatically indicate human construction. Independent geological assessments by experts not affiliated with Osman Agic's foundation have consistently concluded that the formations are natural, though some researchers have called for more detailed studies before making final judgments. The Ravne tunnels remain one of the more puzzling elements. While the tunnels are clearly artificial in part, having been carved or expanded by human hands, the question is when and why. Some researchers suggest the tunnels could be medieval mining works or part of older infrastructure, but definitive dating has proven difficult. The stone blocks found inside the tunnels, along with the carved symbols, have not been conclusively linked to any known ancient culture or period. Osman Agic's team has claimed that some of the stone bears inscriptions resembling ancient scripts, but linguistic and epigraphic experts have found no convincing parallels in known writing systems. Energy phenomena reported at the site add another layer to the story. Osman Agic has claimed that the pyramids emit a beam of electromagnetic energy from their peaks, and that the tunnels contain elevated levels of negative ions, which some alternative health practitioners believe have therapeutic effects. Scientific measurements of electromagnetic fields and air quality have been conducted, but results have been inconclusive or within normal ranges. Skeptics view these claims as part of a broader pattern of pseudoscientific assertions that appeal to New Age beliefs but lack rigorous empirical support. Despite the controversy, the Bosnian Pyramid project continues. Excavations proceed each summer with volunteers arriving from dozens of countries. Osman Agic remains undeterred by criticism, insisting that time will vindicate his claims. He has published books, produced documentaries, and maintained a strong online presence, building a global community of supporters. Whether the hills of Visoko are ancient pyramids or natural geological formations, they have become a symbol of the tension between mainstream science and alternative inquiry, between institutional authority and grassroots discovery. The story of the Bosnian Pyramids is not just about stones and soil. It is about who gets to decide what counts as evidence, who controls the narrative of the past, and whether there is room in archaeology for unconventional ideas that challenge the status quo. For now, the hills keep their secrets and the debate rages on. In the shallow lagoon off the southeastern shore of Pohnpei, one of the Caroline Islands in Micronesia, lies a city unlike any other on Earth. Nan Madol, a sprawling complex of nearly 100 artificial islets, rises from the coral reef in silent testimony to a vanished civilization. Massive basalt columns, stacked like logs in geometric patterns, form walls, platforms and enclosures that stretch across more than 70 hectares of open water. Some of the stones weigh as much as 50 tons, and the total volume of basalt used in the construction is estimated at around 750,000 metric tons. Yet the people who built Nan Madol had no metal tools, no wheels, no draft animals, and no written language to record how they accomplished this monumental feat. The ruins stand as both an architectural marvel and a profound mystery. They are often called the Venice of the Pacific or the eighth wonder of the world. The name Nan Madol translates roughly to spaces between or in the midst of, referring to the network of canals that separates the artificial islets. The city served as the ceremonial and political center of the Saudeleur dynasty, which ruled Pohnpei from approximately 1200 to 1500 CE. The Saudeleurs were a line of powerful chiefs who centralized authority over the island's scattered clans, consolidating power in a way that was unprecedented in Micronesian society. Nan Madol was their seat of government, a place where the ruling elite lived, conducted religious rituals, and demonstrated their dominance through monumental architecture. The city was divided into distinct zones: administrative centers, residential areas for the nobility, the mortuary complexes where the Saudeleur rulers were entombed, and temple platforms dedicated to deities and ancestral spirits. The construction of Nan Madol is estimated to have taken place over several centuries, with the most intensive building occurring between 1200 and 1450 CE. Archaeological excavations and radiocarbon dating of charcoal and other organic materials found within the structures support this timeline. However, oral traditions passed down by the Pohnpeian people suggest that the origins of Nan Madol may be older, possibly linked to earlier chiefdoms or even mythological events. Local legends tell of twin sorcerers named Olisipa and Olosopa, who arrived on Pohnpei from a distant land and used magic to levitate the massive stones into place, guiding them through the air with the help of a flying dragon. While such stories are clearly symbolic, they reflect the awe and bewilderment that the site has inspired for generations. The basalt used in Nan Madol's construction did not come from the immediate vicinity. The stone was quarried from several locations on the main island of Pohnpei, some as far as several kilometers away. Basalt is a volcanic rock formed from cooled lava, and it naturally fractures into long hexagonal or polygonal columns as it cools. This columnar jointing gives basalt its distinctive appearance and made it an ideal building material. The columns could be stacked like timber to create walls and platforms without the need for extensive shaping or cutting. However, transporting these massive stones from the quarries to the reef and then assembling them into complex structures was an engineering challenge of staggering proportions. The most widely accepted theory for how the stones were moved involves the use of rafts. Researchers believe that the basalt columns were floated across the lagoon on large rafts made from logs or bundles of bamboo, which were abundant on Pohnpei. At high tide, the rafts could navigate the shallow waters and approach the construction sites. Once in position, the stones would be maneuvered off the rafts using a combination of ropes, levers, and human labor. The columns would then be tipped upright or laid horizontally to form the walls and platforms. This process would have required careful coordination, significant manpower, and intimate knowledge of tides and water levels. Some researchers estimate that moving and placing a single large stone could have required the labor of dozens or even hundreds of people working in carefully orchestrated teams. The environmental challenges of building on a coral reef in the open ocean are immense. The lagoon at Nan Madol is subject to tidal fluctuations, strong currents, and the constant threat of tropical storms. The builders had to create stable foundations on the uneven coral substrate, ensuring that the weight of the massive stones would not cause the structures to sink or collapse. To achieve this, they constructed artificial platforms by filling sections of the reef with coral rubble and then laying large basalt boulders as a base. On top of these foundations, the columnar basalt was stacked in crisscrossing patterns, creating walls that were both strong and flexible enough to withstand the forces of water and weather. The engineering sophistication required to design and execute this work suggests a high level of technical knowledge and experience with marine construction. One of the most impressive structures at Nan Madol is Nan Duwas, a massive enclosure built on one of the larger islets. The walls of Nan Duwas rise more than 8 meters in some places and are composed of enormous basalt columns stacked with precision. The structure is believed to have served as a royal mortuary, where the remains of Saudalur rulers were placed in elaborate tombs. Inside the enclosure, archaeologists have found evidence of burial chambers, ceremonial artifacts, and offerings of food and valuables meant to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The scale and craftsmanship of Nan Duwas reflect the importance of ancestor worship and the belief in the sacred power of the dead in Pohnpeian culture. The social organization required to build Nan Madol was extraordinary. The Saudalur rulers commanded a centralized authority that could mobilize large numbers of workers, organize labor teams, and manage the logistics of quarrying, transporting, and assembling the stones. The population of Pohnpei during the height of the Saudalur dynasty is estimated to have been around 25,000 people, a relatively small number given the scale of the construction. This suggests that a significant portion of the population was engaged in building and maintaining Nan Madol, either through tribute labor, a religious obligation, or a combination of both. The ruling class likely lived at Nan Madol, while the commoners resided in villages on the main island, traveling to the city for ceremonies, trade, and labor duties. The cultural reasons behind Nan Madol's construction go beyond mere political power. The city was a sacred space, a place where the physical and spiritual worlds intersected. The Saudalur claimed divine or semi-divine status, and their authority was legitimized through rituals and ceremonies conducted at Nan Madol. The architectural layout of the city reflected cosmological beliefs, with certain islets dedicated to specific deities, ancestors, or celestial phenomena. The use of basalt, a stone born from the Earth's volcanic fire, may have carried symbolic significance, representing strength, permanence, and the connection between the land and the sea. The canals that separated the islets were not merely functional, they also served as boundaries between sacred and profane spaces, reinforcing the hierarchical and ritualistic nature of the city. Despite its grandeur, Nan Madol was abandoned around 1500 CE, not long after the fall of the Saudalur dynasty. According to oral tradition, the Saudalur were overthrown by a warrior named Isokelekel, who came from the island of Khosrai to the east. Isokelekel and his followers defeated the Saudalur in battle and established a new ruling system based on a more decentralized model of chieftainship. The new leaders chose not to live at Nan Madol, possibly because the site was too closely associated with the oppressive rule of the Saudalur, or because maintaining such a large and remote complex was no longer feasible. Over time, the city was reclaimed by the jungle and the sea. Mangroves grew among the ruins, and the stones became encrusted with coral and algae. By the time European explorers arrived in the 19th century, Nan Madol was already a ghost city, mysterious and overgrown. The first detailed Western account of Nan Madol came from Irish adventurer James O'Connell, who visited Pohnpei in the 1830s and described the ruins as astonishing and inexplicable. Later, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, German and Japanese colonial administrators documented the site, though large-scale archaeological work did not begin until the mid-20th century. American archaeologists conducted systematic excavations in the 1960s and 1970s, mapping the layout of the city, identifying different functional zones, and collecting artifacts such as pottery, shell ornaments, and basalt tools. These studies confirmed that Nan Madol was built during the Söderlör period and provided valuable insights into the social and political organization of the time. One of the enduring mysteries of Nan Madol is the lack of written records. The Pohnpeian people did not have a system of writing, so all information about the city's construction, purpose, and history comes from oral tradition, which can be difficult to verify and may have been altered or embellished over generations. This absence of documentation has left many questions unanswered. What was the exact sequence of construction? How many people were involved? What specific rituals were performed at the site? How did the Söderlör justify the enormous expenditure of labor and resources? These gaps in knowledge have fueled speculation and alternative theories about Nan Madol's origins. Some researchers have suggested that Nan Madol may be part of a broader tradition of megalithic construction that spread across the Pacific, possibly linked to ancient seafaring cultures. Similar stone structures, though not as elaborate, have been found on other Micronesian islands, and the use of large stones in ceremonial architecture is a common theme throughout Polynesia and Southeast Asia. This has led to theories about a lost network of maritime civilizations that once spanned the Pacific, sharing knowledge of navigation, astronomy, and monumental building techniques. While there is no concrete evidence of a single unified culture, the similarities in construction methods and symbolic motifs suggest long-distance cultural contacts and exchanges. Recent archaeological and geological research has raised new questions about Nan Madol's age and origins. Some scientists have proposed that the site may have been built in stages over a longer period than previously thought, with earlier structures possibly dating back further than the Söderlör dynasty. Underwater surveys of the surrounding lagoon have revealed submerged stone formations and possible ruins that could indicate older phases of construction or even settlements that predated Nan Madol. However, these findings remain controversial and require further investigation. Rising sea levels and the dynamic nature of coral reef environments make it difficult to date submerged features accurately. The legacy of Nan Madol endures in the cultural memory of the Pohnpeian people. The site is considered sacred and access to certain areas is restricted by traditional taboos. Local communities continue to honor the ancestors who built the city, and oral histories about the Söderlörs and the magic of Nan Madol are still told. In recent years, efforts have been made to preserve and protect the ruins from erosion, looting, and the encroachment of vegetation. Nan Madol was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2016, recognizing its outstanding universal value and the need for international cooperation in its conservation. Yet Nan Madol also faces threats. Climate change and rising sea levels pose a direct risk to the structures, which are already vulnerable to storm surges and wave action. Increased rainfall and stronger typhoons accelerate erosion and destabilize the ancient stonework. Tourism, while economically beneficial, can also cause damage if not carefully managed. Balancing the need for preservation with the desire to share this remarkable site with the world is an ongoing challenge. Nan Madol stands as a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the enduring power of cultural expression. It reminds us that even without the tools and technologies we take for granted today, ancient peoples were capable of extraordinary achievements. The city in the lagoon, with its silent stone walls and winding canals, continues to captivate and confound, inviting us to consider how much we have yet to learn about the past and the many ways human societies have shaped their worlds. In the late summer of 1987, Kihachiro Aratake, a dive tour operator based on Yonaguni Island at the far southwestern tip of Japan, was exploring the waters off the island's southern coast in search of new sights to show tourists. Yonaguni, a tiny speck of land closer to Taiwan than to mainland Japan, is known for its clear waters, strong currents, and abundant marine life, particularly hammerhead sharks that migrate through the area. As Aratake descended into the blue depths, he expected to find the usual coral formations and schools of fish. Instead, he encountered something that would ignite one of the most enduring controversies in underwater archaeology. Massive stone structures rising from the seafloor, featuring sharp edges, flat terraces, and what appeared to be right angles and straight lines. The formations looked almost architectural, as if carved by deliberate hands, and they stretched across an area the size of several city blocks, lying between 5 and 40 meters beneath the surface. Word of Aratake's discovery spread quickly through Japan's diving community, and soon researchers, journalists, and curious adventurers were making the journey to Yonaguni to see the underwater structures for themselves. Among the first scientists to investigate was Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyu in Okinawa. Kimura had spent years studying the geology of the Ryukyu Islands and was familiar with the region's tectonic activity and sedimentary rock formations. When he first dove on the site in the late 1980s, he was struck by the geometric precision of certain features. There were what appeared to be stepped terraces rising in parallel layers, flat platforms that looked like artificial plazas, and channels that seemed too regular to be the result of random erosion. In one area, a particularly striking feature resembled a massive staircase, with each step uniform in height and depth. Nearby, what looked like a stone pillar or column stood upright on the seafloor, and in another section, Kimura observed what he believed might be carved faces or symbols etched into the rock. Kimura became convinced that the Yonaguni structures were not natural formations, but rather the remnants of an ancient man-made monument, possibly a temple, fortress, or ceremonial complex. He argued that the site had been constructed on land during the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower than today, and had been submerged as glaciers melted and oceans rose at the end of the Pleistocene epoch, roughly 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. If Kimura's interpretation was correct, the Yonaguni Monument, as it came to be called, would be older than any known civilization in Japan. The earliest confirmed human settlements in the Japanese archipelago date back to the Jomon period, beginning around 14,000 BCE, characterized by hunter-gatherer societies that eventually developed pottery and semi-sedentary lifestyles. However, there is no evidence of monumental stone architecture from that era. A structure as sophisticated as the Yonaguni Monument, if man-made, would suggest the existence of a previously unknown culture with advanced stoneworking skills and organizational capacity. Kimura dedicated much of his career to documenting and promoting his interpretation of the site. He conducted hundreds of dives, took thousands of photographs and measurements, and published books and papers arguing for the artificial origin of the structures. He pointed to specific features that he believed could not be explained by natural processes alone. For example, he identified what he called loop roads, pathways that seemed to circle around the terraces, and drainage channels that appeared designed to direct water flow. He also noted the presence of what looked like tool marks, particularly on the flat surfaces and edges of the stone blocks, and claimed to have found holes that might have been used to secure wooden beams or posts. In addition, Kimura drew comparisons between the underwater structures and ancient stone ruins found elsewhere in the Ryukyu Islands, including the terraced fortifications of Nakagusuku Castle and other Okinawan sites, suggesting a possible cultural continuity. The debate intensified when Robert Schoch, a geologist from Boston University and a respected expert in erosion and weathering, visited Yonaguni in the late 1990s. Schoch had gained fame in alternative archaeology circles for his work on the Great Sphinx of Egypt, where he argued that weathering patterns on the monument indicated it was much older than traditionally believed. Given his willingness to challenge conventional timelines, some supporters of the Yonaguni Monument hoped he would validate Kimura's claims. However, after diving on the site and examining the structures in detail, Schoch concluded that the formations were almost certainly natural. He explained that the rocks at Yonaguni are composed of fine sandstone and mudstone, types of sedimentary rock that form in horizontal layers over millions of years. These layers, known as bedding planes, are naturally separated by thin zones of weakness, and vertical fractures called joints cut through the rock at regular intervals due to tectonic stress. When sandstone is subjected to wave action, currents, and weathering, it tends to break along these existing planes and joints, creating flat surfaces, sharp edges, and geometric shapes that can appear man-made. Schoch pointed out that many of the features Kimura identified as artificial, the terraces, the right angles, the flat platforms, could be explained by the natural fracturing and erosion of the bedrock. The staircase, for instance, was likely the result of horizontal bedding planes being exposed as overlying layers eroded away. The vertical walls and channels could be attributed to jointing patterns in the rock. Schoch also noted that he saw no clear evidence of tool marks, no signs of quarrying or deliberate shaping, and no artifacts such as pottery, tools, or construction debris that would typically be associated with a human-built structure. He acknowledged that some features at Yonaguni were unusual and that human activity might have modified or enhanced certain natural formations, but he did not believe the site was primarily artificial. His position was that the Yonaguni structures were a fascinating example of how natural geological processes can create forms that mimic architecture, but they did not constitute proof of a lost civilization. The disagreement between Kimura and Schoch highlights the challenges of interpreting underwater rock formations, especially in the absence of clear contextual evidence. Unlike terrestrial archaeological sites, where stratigraphy, associated artifacts, and soil layers provide crucial information, underwater sites are often stripped of such context by currents, marine growth, and the dynamic nature of the ocean environment. The strong currents around Yonaguni make diving difficult and limit the amount of time researchers can spend examining the structures in detail. Visibility can be poor, and the rock surfaces are often covered with algae, coral, and sediment, obscuring fine details. These conditions make it hard to distinguish between natural features and potential human modifications. Despite the skepticism of mainstream geologists, Kimura continued to argue his case, and the Yonaguni Monument attracted a following among alternative history enthusiasts and those interested in lost civilizations. Some researchers suggested that the site might be connected to the legend of Mu or Lemuria, hypothetical sunken continents that appear in various pseudoscientific and esoteric traditions. Others proposed that the monument was built by an advanced prehistoric culture that was wiped out by rising sea levels or a catastrophic event at the end of the Ice Age. These theories, while lacking solid evidence, tapped into a broader cultural fascination with the idea that much of human history has been lost beneath the waves and that ancient peoples were more sophisticated than conventional archaeology acknowledges. One of the intriguing aspects of the Yonaguni debate is the broader context of submerged landscapes around Japan. During the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, sea levels were approximately 120 meters lower than they are today. Much of what is now the East China Sea and the shallow waters around the Ryukyu Islands would have been dry land, creating land bridges and coastal plains that connected the islands to the Asian mainland. Archaeological evidence from other parts of Japan and East Asia shows that humans were living in the region during this period, hunting, gathering, and creating stone tools. If communities did inhabit the now submerged coastlines, their settlements, campsites, and any structures they built would have been inundated as sea levels rose. This raises the possibility that significant archaeological sites lie hidden on the continental shelf, waiting to be discovered. In recent years, underwater surveys using sonar and remotely operated vehicles have identified other anomalous formations off the coast of Japan, including what some researchers believe are stone circles, pathways, and possible burial sites. While none of these discoveries have been conclusively proven to be man-made, They add to the sense that the shallow seas around Japan may hold important clues about prehistoric human activity. The challenge is conducting thorough investigations in difficult underwater conditions and distinguishing between natural geology and human modification. The Yonaguni Monument also raises questions about the nature of evidence and the standards of proof in archaeology. How do we determine whether a feature is natural or artificial, especially when it exists in an environment where traditional excavation and analysis are limited? Kimura argues that the burden of proof should not rest entirely on those claiming the site is man-made. Rather, he believes that the unique characteristics of the structures warrant serious investigation and an open mind. He points to the cumulative weight of the evidence, the geometric precision, the alignment of features, in the presence of what he interprets as tool marks and carvings, as justification for considering the possibility of human involvement. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the natural explanation, while perhaps less exciting, is more consistent with the available data and the principles of geology. The debate over Yonaguni is also influenced by cultural and national factors. In Japan, there is considerable public interest in the monument, and it has become a popular diving destination. Local authorities on Yonaguni Island have embraced the site as a tourist attraction, and the mystery surrounding it has brought attention and economic benefits to the remote island. Some Japanese researchers and media outlets have promoted the idea that the monument represents evidence of an ancient Japanese civilization, potentially predating other known cultures in the region. This nationalist dimension can complicate objective scientific inquiry as the site becomes entangled with questions of cultural identity and heritage. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence cited by Kimura is a particular feature he calls the turtle, a large stone that resembles a carved animal figure. He also points to what he describes as a triangular pool and a stone stage, features that he believes show intentional design. Additionally, he has documented what appear to be straight grooves and channels carved into the rock, which he argues are too regular to be natural. Skeptics respond that pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar patterns in random shapes, may be at play, and that selective interpretation of ambiguous features can lead to erroneous conclusions. Without clear evidence of tool marks, construction techniques, or associated artifacts, it remains difficult to definitively prove that human hands shaped the Yonaguni structures. Another line of inquiry involves comparing the Yonaguni formations to known archaeological sites in the region. Some researchers have noted similarities between the underwater terraces and the stone platforms and fortifications found at ancient Ryukyuan castles and sacred sites, which date from the medieval period. However, these terrestrial structures are much younger than the proposed age of the Yonaguni Monument and were built using different techniques. The connection, if any, remains speculative. Others have looked to the prehistoric megalithic traditions of other Pacific cultures, such as the Moai of Easter Island or the stone structures of Nan Madol, as possible parallels. While these comparisons are intriguing, they do not provide direct evidence of human activity at Yonaguni. The lack of definitive proof has not diminished the fascination with the Yonaguni Monument. Documentaries, books, and online discussions continue to explore the mystery, and the site remains a focal point for debates about lost civilizations, underwater archaeology, and the limits of conventional scientific explanations. For some, Yonaguni represents the tantalizing possibility that much of our ancient past lies hidden beneath the sea, erased by the relentless rise of ocean waters at the end of the Ice Age. For others, it is a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeing what we want to see and the importance of rigorous, evidence-based inquiry. As technology advances, new tools for underwater exploration may eventually provide clearer answers. High-resolution sonar, advanced diving equipment, and improved methods for dating submerged rock surfaces could help resolve the debate. Until then, the Yonaguni Monument remains an enigma, a place where geology and archaeology, science and speculation meet beneath the waves off a remote Japanese island. Whether it is the remnant of a lost civilization or simply a remarkable work of nature, it continues to challenge our assumptions and remind us that the ocean still holds many secrets. In the arid valley of the Supe River, about 200 kilometers north of Lima, Peru, lies a sprawling ancient city that most people have never heard of. Caral-Supe, as it is known today, was a thriving urban center more than 4,000 years ago, contemporary with the construction of Egypt's Great Pyramids and predating the famous civilizations of Mesoamerica by nearly 2 millennia. When schoolchildren learn about the ancient Americas, they hear about the Aztecs with their grand capital of Tenochtitlan, the Maya with their intricate hieroglyphic writing and astronomical knowledge, and the Inca with their mountain fortresses and expansive empire. But Caral, the oldest known city in the Americas, remains largely absent from textbooks and popular consciousness. This omission is remarkable, not only because of Caral's age, but because of what it reveals about the possibilities of human civilization. A complex, sophisticated society that flourished for over 1,000 years without warfare, without weapons, and apparently without the violence that characterized so many other early states. The story of Caral's rediscovery begins with Ruth Shady Solis, a Peruvian archaeologist who had spent years studying the coastal valleys of central Peru. In the early 1990s, Shady became interested in a series of large mounds in the Supe Valley that had been noted in earlier surveys but largely ignored by archaeologists. Many assumed the mounds were natural hills or relatively recent constructions. However, Shady suspected they were much older and potentially significant. In 1994, she began systematic excavations at the site, and what she uncovered would fundamentally alter our understanding of the development of complex societies in the Americas. Caral consists of 6 major pyramid-like structures, the largest of which covers an area roughly the size of 4 football fields and rises nearly 20 meters above the valley floor. These platform mounds were built using stone and earth, with retaining walls made from river cobbles set in mesh bags woven from plant fibers. The construction technique was labor-intensive and required careful planning. Workers filled thousands of these woven bags, called shikras, with rocks and then stacked them to create the core of the pyramids. The outer surfaces were faced with cut stone blocks and finished with plaster. Archaeologists have found evidence that the pyramids were built in stages, with successive layers added over time, suggesting a long period of continuous construction and renovation. Surrounding the pyramids are sunken circular plazas, residential complexes, and what appear to be amphitheaters designed to hold large gatherings. The city's layout reflects a high degree of urban planning, with distinct zones for ceremonial activities, elite residences, and communal spaces. The residential areas include both large, well-constructed buildings that likely housed the ruling class or priesthood, and smaller structures that were home to artisans, laborers, and their families. The population of Caral at its peak is estimated to have been around 3,000 people, a substantial number for such an early period and a clear indication of social organization and economic surplus. One of the most astonishing aspects of Caral is the complete absence of evidence for warfare. Archaeologists have excavated hundreds of burials and examined thousands of artifacts, yet they have found no weapons designed for combat, no fortifications or defensive walls, and no skeletal remains showing signs of violent trauma or battle injuries. This is in stark contrast to many other early civilizations where warfare and conflict appear to have been central features of social and political life. The absence of warfare at Caral raises profound questions. How did this society maintain order and resolve disputes? What motivated people to cooperate in the construction of monumental architecture without the coercion of military force? And what does it tell us about the diversity of paths that human societies can take as they develop complexity? The economy of Caral was based on a sophisticated system of trade and resource exchange. The city itself is located about 20 kilometers inland from the Pacific coast, in a desert valley where agriculture would have been challenging without irrigation. The people of Caral developed an extensive network of canals to bring water from the Supe River to their fields, allowing them to cultivate crops such as squash, beans, and sweet potatoes. However, the most important agricultural product was not food, but cotton. The people of Caral grew cotton in large quantities and used it to produce textiles and, crucially, fishing nets. These nets were traded to coastal fishing communities, who in turn provided Caral with abundant supplies of fish and other marine resources. This symbiotic relationship between inland agricultural producers and coastal fishermen created a stable economic foundation that supported the growth and longevity of the city. Archaeological evidence shows that the residents of Caral consumed large quantities of anchovies and sardines, which were brought inland from the coast, likely dried or salted for preservation. The fish provided essential protein, while the agricultural produce from the valley supplemented the diet. This trade network extended beyond the immediate region, as artifacts from Caral include shells from the coast, obsidian from highland sources, and tropical bird feathers that must have come from the Amazon basin to the east. The presence of these exotic materials indicates long-distance trade connections and suggests that Caral was a hub in a broader economic and cultural network that spanned diverse ecological zones. The social and political organization of Caral remains somewhat enigmatic due to the lack of written records. Unlike the Maya or the later Andean civilizations, the people of Caral did not develop a system of writing that has survived in the archaeological record. However, they did create quipu-like recording devices, arrangements of knotted strings that may have been used to keep track of trade goods, labor contributions, or other quantitative information. The quipu would later become a central feature of Inca administration, used to record everything from census data to tribute payments. The discovery of possible proto-quipus at Caral suggests that this technology has deep roots in Andean history, stretching back thousands of years before the rise of the Inca Empire. The pyramids and public architecture at Caral were clearly the focus of significant communal effort, and their construction would have required a large, organized labor force. It is likely that the society was stratified, with a ruling elite or priestly class that directed construction projects, organized trade, and presided over religious ceremonies. The sunken circular plazas and amphitheaters suggest that communal gatherings, rituals, and festivals played an important role in social life. Music appears to have been significant as well. Archaeologists have found flutes made from bird bones and evidence of other musical instruments, indicating that ceremonies at Caral may have included performances and elaborate rituals designed to reinforce social cohesion and shared identity. The engineering achievements at Caral are remarkable, particularly given the technological constraints of the time. The people of Caral had no metal tools. Copper and bronze metallurgy would not develop in the Andes for another 2,000 years. They worked with stone, wood, and plant fibers, yet they managed to construct massive pyramids, extensive irrigation systems, and durable architectural complexes that have survived millennia in the harsh desert environment. The use of chakras, the woven bags filled with stone, was an ingenious solution that allowed builders to create stable, earthquake-resistant structures. The Supe Valley, like much of Peru, is seismically active, and the flexibility of the chakra construction method likely helped the pyramids withstand tremors that would have damaged more rigid structures. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials from Caral, including plant fibers from the chakras, charcoal from hearths, and food remains, has consistently yielded dates between 2600 and 2000 BCE. This places the city's florescence in the late Archaic period, a time when most human societies in the Americas were still practicing hunting, gathering, and small-scale horticulture. The existence of a fully urban, architecturally sophisticated and economically complex society at such an early date challenges the traditional narrative that cities and states emerged only after the development of intensive agriculture and the accumulation of surplus food. De Caral demonstrates that other pathways to complexity were possible, pathways rooted in trade, cooperation and cultural innovation rather than agricultural dominance and military conquest. The decline and eventual abandonment of Caral around 1800 BCE remains a subject of ongoing research. There is no clear evidence of sudden catastrophe or violent destruction. Instead, it appears that the city was gradually depopulated, possibly due to environmental changes, shifts in trade networks, or the rise of competing centers in other valleys. Some researchers have suggested that prolonged droughts or changes in river flow patterns may have made it difficult to sustain the irrigation systems that supported agriculture. Others propose that the economic system based on cotton and fish trade became less viable as new technologies or social arrangements emerged elsewhere. Whatever the cause, the people of Caral left behind their monumental architecture and moved on, and the city was eventually buried under layers of wind-blown sand, hidden from view for thousands of years. The question of why Caral receives so little attention in mainstream education and popular culture is complex. Part of the answer lies in the relatively recent date of its discovery and excavation. Unlike sites such as Machu Picchu or the ruins of Teotihuacan, which have been known for centuries and extensively studied, Caral was only recognized as a major archaeological site in the 1990s. It takes time for new discoveries to be integrated into educational curricula and public awareness. Additionally, Caral lacks some of the dramatic visual elements that capture popular imagination. There are no towering stone sculptures, elaborate tombs filled with gold, or decipherable inscriptions. The architecture, while impressive, is more subtle and requires context to fully appreciate. There may also be a cultural bias at play. Western narratives of ancient civilization have long focused on societies that developed writing, metallurgy, and monumental stone carving, features associated with Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Caral, with its textile economy, absence of writing, and peaceful character, does not fit neatly into these familiar categories. Its significance challenges Eurocentric models of how civilizations develop and forces a rethinking of what constitutes complexity and sophistication in human societies. Recognizing Caral's importance means acknowledging that the indigenous peoples of the Americas developed their own unique forms of social organization independently and on their own terms long before contact with the Old World. The discovery of Caral has also prompted archaeologists to re-evaluate other sites in Peru and along the Andean coast. Surveys of the Norte Chico region, where Caral is located, have identified at least 20 other large settlements with similar architecture and dating to roughly the same period. This suggests that Caral was not an isolated phenomenon but part of a broader cultural complex, sometimes referred to as the Caral-Supe civilization or the Norte Chico civilization. These cities were contemporary with one another and likely interacted through trade, shared religious practices, and possibly political alliances. The full extent and nature of this early Andean civilization are still being explored, and each new excavation brings fresh insights. The implications of Caral extend beyond South America. The city's existence demonstrates that urbanization, monumental architecture, and complex social organization are not the inevitable result of a single developmental pathway, but can emerge from diverse ecological, economic, and cultural contexts. Caral's peaceful character raises the possibility that violence and warfare, while common in human history, are not necessary preconditions for the rise of cities and states. It suggests that cooperation, trade, and shared cultural practices can be equally powerful drivers of social complexity. This perspective is not only historically significant, but also relevant to contemporary discussions about human nature, social organization, and the possibilities for peaceful coexistence. Ruth Shady's work at Caral continues, supported by the Peruvian government and international research collaborations. The site has been designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognizing its outstanding universal value and the need for its preservation. Efforts are underway to develop Caral as a destination for cultural tourism, with the hope that greater public awareness will lead to increased support for archaeological research and conservation. Shady has been a tireless advocate for the importance of Caral, not only as a scientific discovery, but as a source of pride and identity for Peru and for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. As excavations expand and new technologies such as ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery are applied, there is every reason to believe that more ancient cities will be discovered in the deserts and valleys of Peru. The landscape is vast, and much of it remains unexplored. Beneath the sands and scrub vegetation may lie other urban centers, trade networks, and cultural achievements waiting to be uncovered. Caral has opened a window into a forgotten chapter of human history, a chapter that reminds us of the ingenuity, diversity, and resilience of our ancestors. It is a story that deserves to be told, taught, and celebrated, not as a footnote to the history of the Americas, but as a foundational chapter in the story of human civilization itself. In 1963, a man living in the town of Derinkuyu in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey was renovating his home when he knocked down a wall in his basement and discovered something unexpected: a dark tunnel leading deeper into the earth. Curious, he followed the passage and found himself in a vast underground chamber which opened into more tunnels, more rooms, and a labyrinth of passages carved into the soft volcanic rock beneath his feet. What he had stumbled upon was not a simple cellar or storage space, but the entrance to one of the most astonishing architectural achievements in human history. An 18-story subterranean city capable of sheltering up to 20,000 people, complete with living quarters, stables, kitchens, churches, wine presses, schools, and an ingenious ventilation system that supplied fresh air to the deepest levels, 85 meters below the surface. Derinkuyu, as the underground city is known, had been hidden for centuries, its existence forgotten or dismissed as a legend until that chance discovery brought it back into the light. The Cappadocia region is a surreal landscape of fairy chimneys, cave dwellings, and eroded rock formations, sculpted over millions of years by volcanic activity and erosion. The bedrock is composed of tuff, a soft, volcanic ash that solidified into stone. Tuff is relatively easy to carve with simple tools, yet it hardens upon exposure to air, making it a surprisingly durable building material. For thousands of years, people in Cappadocia have taken advantage of this geology, carving homes, churches, monasteries, and storage rooms directly into the rock. But Derinkuyu is not just a collection of caves. It is a planned, a multi-level city, a feat of engineering and organization that raises profound questions about who built it, when, and most importantly, why. After the initial discovery, Turkish authorities began a systematic exploration and excavation of Derinkuyu. What they found was staggering in scale and complexity. The city extends at least 18 levels deep, though only about 8 levels are currently open to the public, as the lower levels are partially collapsed, flooded, or deemed too dangerous for visitors. The upper levels contain living spaces with small rooms carved into the rock that would have served as sleeping quarters for families. The rooms are connected by narrow corridors and staircases, some so low and tight that adults must crouch or crawl to pass through. These tight passages were not merely a consequence of limited space. They were defensive features designed to slow down invaders and make it difficult for armed attackers to move through the city. One of the most striking features of Derinkuyu is the series of massive rolling stone doors, each weighing several hundred kilograms, that could be used to seal off sections of the city from the inside. These doors are circular, roughly 1.5 meters in diameter and up to 50 centimeters thick, shaped like millstones. They were designed to roll into place across tunnel entrances, blocking access and protecting the inhabitants from intruders. Once closed, the doors could be secured with a locking mechanism operated from the inside, making it nearly impossible for attackers to breach. The presence of these doors throughout the city indicates that defense was a primary concern and that the builders anticipated the need to seal themselves underground for extended periods. The engineering of Derinkuyu's ventilation system is perhaps its most impressive achievement. Without a constant supply of fresh air, the lower levels of the city would quickly become uninhabitable due to the accumulation of carbon dioxide and the lack of oxygen. The builders solved this problem by carving a series of vertical ventilation shafts that extended from the surface down to the deepest levels. The main shaft is approximately 55 meters deep and was designed to function as both an air duct and a water well, providing fresh air and access to groundwater. Secondary shafts branch off at various levels, ensuring that air circulates throughout the entire complex. The system is so effective that even today, visitors can feel a steady breeze moving through the tunnels, and the air quality remains breathable despite the depth and enclosed spaces. The knowledge required to design and construct such a system, understanding airflow, pressure differentials, and the need for multiple access points, speaks to a high level of technical sophistication. Water was another critical resource, and Derinkuyu features several wells and cisterns to store and distribute water throughout the city. The main well, which doubles as a ventilation shaft, taps into an underground aquifer, ensuring a reliable supply even during prolonged sieges or droughts. Smaller wells and storage tanks are scattered across different levels, allowing residents to access water without having to travel to the surface. The city also includes areas for food storage, with large chambers that would have been used to keep grain, dried fruits, and other provisions. There are wine presses and oil presses carved into the rock, indicating that the inhabitants not only stored food but also processed it underground. Stables for livestock are found on several levels, with carved mangers and feeding troughs, suggesting that animals were brought into the city during times of danger. Religious spaces are prominent in Derinkuyu. Numerous chambers have been identified as churches, complete with altars, apses, and seating areas carved into the rock. Some of these spaces feature crosses and other Christian symbols, leading many researchers to conclude that the city was extensively used and expanded by early Christians. Historical records indicate that Christians in Cappadocia faced persecution during the Roman Empire, particularly during the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, and later during the Arab raids of the 7th and 8th centuries. It is plausible that Christian communities retreated underground to escape persecution, using Derinkuyu and similar sites as refuges. However, the presence of Christian iconography does not necessarily mean that Christians built the original city. They may have simply adapted and expanded an existing structure. Archaeological and historical evidence suggests that Derinkuyu's origins may be much older than the Christian period. Some researchers believe that the city was first excavated during the Phrygian period, where around the 8th to 7th centuries BCE, or even earlier during the Hittite era, which would place its construction in the Bronze Age around 1500 to 1200 BCE. Ancient Greek historian Xenophon, writing in the 4th century BCE, mentioned that people in Anatolia lived in underground dwellings, suggesting that the practice of subterranean habitation was already well established by that time. Hittite texts also reference underground storage facilities and tunnels, though no definitive archaeological evidence has yet linked Derinkuyu directly to the Hittites. The possibility that the city is thousands of years older than previously thought adds another layer of mystery and raises the question of how such an ambitious project could have been undertaken with the tools and technology available in the Bronze Age. The purpose of Derinkuyu remains a subject of debate. The most common explanation is that it served as a refuge during times of invasion, persecution, or conflict. The Cappadocia region, located at the crossroads of major trade routes and empires, has been repeatedly invaded and contested throughout history. Hittites, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, and Turks have all passed through or controlled the area, and the local population would have had ample reason to seek protection underground. The rolling stone doors, the defensive layout of the tunnels, and the capacity to house thousands of people all support the idea that Derinkuyu was designed as a fortress, a place where entire communities could retreat and survive for weeks or even months until danger passed. However, some researchers propose alternative explanations. One theory suggests that the underground cities were built in response to catastrophic climate events, such as extreme cold or prolonged droughts, which made life on the surface untenable. The region's harsh winters and vulnerability to invasion might have made underground living a practical adaptation rather than a temporary refuge. Another theory, more speculative, posits that the cities were built to protect against unknown or forgotten threats, possibly even cosmic events such as asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, or solar storms. While there is no concrete evidence for such scenarios, the sheer scale and effort involved in carving Derinkuyu suggests that the builders were motivated by something more than ordinary military concerns. Derinkuyu is not alone. Across the Cappadocia region, archaeologists have identified more than 200 underground cities and complexes, ranging from small family shelters to massive multi-level settlements. The nearby city of Kaymaklı is almost as large as Derinkuyu, and the two are connected by a tunnel several kilometers long, allowing inhabitants to move between them without surfacing. This network of subterranean cities suggests that underground living was a widespread and sustained practice in the region, spanning centuries and possibly millennia. The existence of such an extensive network implies a shared culture of subterranean architecture, a tradition passed down through generations, and a collective understanding of the strategic and practical advantages of living beneath the earth. The construction of Derinkuyu would have required an enormous investment of labor and resources. Carving through solid rock, even soft tuff, is slow and physically demanding work. Estimates suggest that it would have taken many years, perhaps decades or even centuries, to excavate the entire complex, with successive generations adding new levels and expanding existing chambers. The coordination required to plan and execute such a project indicates a high level of social organization, a centralized authority or communal effort capable of mobilizing large numbers of workers and sustaining the project over long periods. The fact that the city was designed with such attention to detail, ventilation, water supply, defense, and storage, demonstrates that the builders were not simply digging holes in the ground, but were creating a fully functional underground environment. Our modern visitors to Derinkuyu often describe a sense of awe and claustrophobia as they descend through the narrow passageways and low-ceilinged chambers. The scale of the city is difficult to grasp until you are standing inside it, feeling the cool air flowing through the ventilation shafts and imagining what it must have been like to live there, cut off from sunlight, surrounded by rock, listening for the sounds of danger above. The experience is both humbling and unsettling, a reminder of the lengths to which human beings will go to protect themselves and their communities. It also raises the question of what has been lost. How many other underground cities remain undiscovered, sealed, and forgotten beneath the hills and plains of Anatolia? How much of the region's history is still hidden, waiting for someone to knock down the right wall or dig in the right place? Derinkuyu has become a major tourist attraction, drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. The Turkish government has invested in preserving and promoting the site, installing lighting, walkways, and informational displays to make the city accessible and safe for tourists. However, the influx of visitors also poses risks, as the soft, tough rock is susceptible to erosion and damage from human traffic. Conservationists are working to balance the need for public access with the imperative to protect the site for future generations. Ongoing archaeological research continues to explore the lower levels and uncover new information about the city's construction, use, and eventual abandonment. The story of Derinkuyu challenges our assumptions about ancient architecture and urban planning. We often think of cities as built upward, towers, walls, and monuments reaching toward the sky. But Derinkuyu reminds us that human ingenuity can also turn inward, carving space and safety from the earth itself. It is a testament to the resourcefulness and determination of people who faced existential threats and chose to dig deeper, to build not monuments to their power, but shelters for their survival. The underground city stands as a symbol of resilience, a reminder that in the face of danger, uncertainty, and fear, human beings have always found ways to endure. And beneath the surface of the earth, in the cool darkness of the carved stone, the echoes of those ancient lives still linger, waiting to tell their story. From space, the Richat Structure looks like a giant eye staring up from the surface of the earth. Located deep in the Sahara Desert of Mauritania, this enormous circular formation spans roughly 40 kilometers in diameter and consists of a series of concentric rings that ripple outward from a central dome. The structure is so large and so perfectly geometric that it serves as a landmark for astronauts aboard the International Space Station, a reference point in the otherwise featureless expanse of sand and rock. For decades, geologists have studied the Richat Structure, also known as the Eye of the Sahara or the Eye of Africa. And the consensus explanation is that it is a deeply eroded geological dome formed by the uplift of rock layers and sculpted over millions of years by wind and water. Yet for a small but passionate group of researchers and alternative history enthusiasts, the Richat Structure represents something far more intriguing: the possible location of Atlantis, the legendary city described by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato more than 2,000 years ago. The story of Atlantis comes to us primarily through two of Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, written around 360 BCE. In these texts, Plato describes Atlantis as a powerful and advanced island civilization that existed 9,000 years before his own time, placing its existence around 9,600 BCE. According to Plato, Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a term generally understood to refer to the Strait of Gibraltar. The city itself was built in a distinctive pattern, a central island surrounded by alternating rings of land and water, with canals connecting the rings and allowing ships to sail from the outer harbour to the centre of the city. The rings were precisely measured, with specific dimensions given in stadia, an ancient Greek unit of length. Plato also described the region around Atlantis as having mountains to the north, a large plain to the south, and access to the ocean. The civilization was ultimately destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophic flooding and earthquakes, sinking beneath the waves and disappearing from history. For centuries, scholars have debated whether Atlantis was a real place, a mythical allegory, or a fictional invention used by Plato to illustrate philosophical points about hubris, governance, and the cyclical nature of civilizations. Countless locations have been proposed as the site of Atlantis, from the Mediterranean island of Santorini to the Caribbean, from Antarctica to the coast of Spain. Most mainstream historians and archaeologists regard Atlantis as a legend, a moral tale rather than a historical account. But in recent years, a growing number of researchers have turned their attention to the Richat Structure, arguing that its physical characteristics, geographic location, and the environmental history of the region align remarkably well with Plato's description. The case for the Richat Structure as Atlantis begins with its appearance. The structure consists of concentric rings of ridges and valleys, alternating in a pattern that closely resembles the layout Plato described. While the rings are not perfectly circular, geologists note that the structure is slightly elliptical. The overall form is strikingly geometric. The outer ring measures approximately 40 kilometers across, and the spacing between the inner rings corresponds, according to some interpretations, to the dimensions Plato provided when converted from ancient stadia to modern measurements. Proponents of the Atlantis hypothesis argue that the mathematical precision of the rings cannot be easily dismissed, and that the structure's appearance from above is exactly what one would expect if Plato's account were based on an actual place. Geologically, the Richat structure is classified as a dome that has been eroded over time. The underlying rock layers were pushed upward millions of years ago, possibly by a mantle plume or volcanic activity, now creating a bulge in the Earth's crust. Over time, erosion wore away the softer rock layers, leaving behind the harder, more resistant layers that now form the concentric ridges. The rings represent different geological strata, sedimentary rocks of varying hardness that erode at different rates. This natural process, according to mainstream geology, is entirely sufficient to explain the structure's appearance without invoking human construction or ancient cities. However, supporters of the Atlantis theory point out that erosion alone does not explain certain features of the site, including the presence of what appear to be rectangular structures, straight lines, and other geometric anomalies visible in satellite imagery. One of the most compelling aspects of the Richat structure as a candidate for Atlantis is its geographic and environmental context. Today, the structure lies in one of the most inhospitable regions on Earth, surrounded by hundreds of kilometers of barren desert. But this was not always the case. Geological and archaeological evidence shows that the Sahara was once a green and fertile landscape, a region of lakes, rivers, grasslands, and forests that supported abundant wildlife and human populations. This period, known as the African Humid Period or the Green Sahara, lasted from approximately 12,000 to 5,000 years ago, coinciding with the end of the last ice age. During this time, the Sahara received significantly more rainfall than it does today, and the region was home to hippos, crocodiles, elephants, and human communities who hunted, fished, and eventually Taosi developed early forms of agriculture and pastoralism. Archaeological surveys in the region around the Richat structure have uncovered stone tools, pottery shards, and evidence of ancient habitations, including what may be the remains of hearths, dwellings, and burial sites. These findings indicate that people lived in the area thousands of years ago when the climate was more hospitable. Some researchers have also reported the presence of what appear to be ancient shorelines and sediment deposits around the structure, suggesting that it may once have been surrounded by water or situated near a large body of water. If true, this would align with Plato's description of Atlantis as a coastal city with access to the sea and surrounded by water channels. The question of how the Richat structure could have been connected to the ocean is central to the Atlantis hypothesis. Plato stated that Atlantis was located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which most scholars interpret as the Strait of Gibraltar. However, some alternative researchers propose that the Pillars of Hercules could have referred to a different geographic feature, possibly along the ancient coastline of West Africa. During the Ice Age, when sea levels were much lower, the coastline of Mauritania extended farther out into what is now the Atlantic Ocean. Rivers that flowed through the Green Sahara may have created navigable waterways connecting the interior to the coast. If the Richat structure was part of a thriving civilization during this period, it could have been accessible by boat and connected to maritime trade networks. Another intriguing element is the orientation and topography of the region. Plato described Atlantis as having mountains to the north and a large plain extending to the south. The Richat structure is situated near the Adrar Plateau, with higher elevations and mountainous terrain to the north and west, and a broad, flat expanse stretching to the south. This geographic alignment matches Plato's description more closely than many other proposed Atlantis locations. Additionally, the structure is positioned in a region that would have been strategically important for trade and communication between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean world, lending credibility to the idea that a significant settlement or city could have existed there. Critics of the Atlantis hypothesis for the Richat structure raise several objections. The most fundamental is the lack of direct archaeological evidence of a city or advanced civilization at the site. Despite satellite surveys and limited ground exploration, no one has uncovered the kind of monumental architecture, writing systems, metallurgy, or large-scale urban infrastructure that would be expected from a civilization as advanced as Plato described. The stone tools and pottery found in the region are consistent with Neolithic or early pastoral societies, not with a sophisticated state capable of engineering complex hydraulic systems and monumental construction. Skeptics argue that the visual similarity between the Richat structure and Plato's description of Atlantis is coincidental, a case of pattern recognition leading to over-interpretation. There is also the challenge of dating. Plato placed the destruction of Atlantis around 9600 BCE, which would be roughly 11,600 years ago. While the Green Sahara period does overlap with this timeframe, the archaeological record from the region does not show evidence of large-scale urbanization or centralized political authority at such an early date. The transition from hunter-gatherer societies to settled agricultural communities in North Africa is generally dated to several thousand years later, and the development of complex states and cities came later still. For the Richat structure to have been Atlantis, it would require a radical revision of our understanding of prehistoric African societies and the timeline of human cultural development. However, proponents of the theory argue that mainstream archaeology has not adequately explored the region and that much of the Sahara remains archaeologically unstudied due to its remoteness and harsh conditions. They point out that major discoveries have been made in recent years, as new technologies such as satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and drone surveys have allowed researchers to identify features that were previously invisible. In 2018, for example, archaeologists using remote sensing techniques discovered evidence of ancient lake systems and river channels in the Sahara that had been completely obscured by sand. These discoveries suggest that large areas of the desert may harbor hidden archaeological sites, including possibly the remains of forgotten cities. Another line of inquiry involves the possibility of catastrophic flooding and climate change. Plato's account states that Atlantis was destroyed in a single day and night by earthquakes and floods. Around 12,000 years ago, the Earth underwent significant climatic upheaval associated with the end of the last ice age. This period, known as the Younger Dryas, was marked by rapid temperature fluctuations, rising sea levels, and possibly catastrophic flooding events caused by the melting of glacial ice dams. Some researchers propose that these climatic shifts could have devastated human settlements in vulnerable regions, including coastal areas and river valleys. If a civilization existed in the Sahara during this time, it could have been wiped out or displaced by dramatic environmental changes, and with the subsequent desertification of the Sahara erasing most physical traces of its existence. There is also the question of why Plato's account, if it were based on real events, would have survived in Greek tradition. Some researchers suggest that knowledge of Atlantis could have been transmitted to the Greeks through Egyptian sources, as Plato himself claimed in the dialogues. Ancient Egypt had extensive trade and cultural contacts with regions across North Africa, and it is plausible that stories of a great city or civilization in the Sahara could have been passed down through oral tradition and eventually recorded by Greek scholars. However, no corroborating Egyptian texts or inscriptions have been found that clearly reference Atlantis, leaving this aspect of the theory speculative. The mathematical dimensions of the Richat structure have been a focal point for those who see it as Atlantis. Plato provided specific measurements for the rings and features of the city, and some researchers claim that when these measurements are converted from ancient stadia and adjusted for potential errors in transmission or translation, They align closely with the dimensions of the Richat structure. For example, Plato described the outer ring of water as being 3 stadia wide, and the rings of land and water alternating in specific proportions. When overlaid onto satellite images of the Richat structure, these proportions appear to match the spacing of the natural ridges and valleys. Critics counter that such correlations are the result of selective interpretation, and that the natural erosion patterns of the structure do not constitute evidence of human design. Despite the controversy, interest in the Richat structure as a potential Atlantis site has grown, fueled by documentaries, books, and online discussions. The site has become a pilgrimage destination for alternative history enthusiasts, though its remote location in the Sahara makes access difficult and expensive. The Mauritanian government has shown some interest in promoting the site as a tourist attraction, though the lack of infrastructure and the challenges of desert travel have limited its development. Scientific expeditions to the area have been few, and much of the region remains unexplored. The debate over the Richat structure and Atlantis ultimately reflects broader questions about how we interpret the past and how much weight we give to ancient texts, geological anomalies, and circumstantial evidence. For some, the similarities between the Richat structure and Plato's description are too striking to ignore and warrant serious investigation. For others, the lack of definitive archaeological proof and the plausibility of natural explanations for the structure's appearance make the Atlantis hypothesis untenable. What remains undeniable is that the Richat structure is a remarkable feature of the Earth's surface, a testament to the power of geological forces and the mysteries that still lie hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right questions and look in the right place.